Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Comic Source Comic Boom collaboration. Time for another daily spawn. We're up to issue number 45. Just a quick reminder what we're doing. It's the 30th anniversary of Spawn. It's also the 30th anniversary of Image Comics. So that, coupled along with the fact that Spawn broke the record for longest creator-owned book when it hit 301 a couple of years ago, which made me want to catch up and read Spawn. And then kind of the final piece is the fact that Todd McFarlane's trying to launch or organically start, let's put it that way, a shared superhero universe, starting with Spawn as the central character, but then hoping it grows organically with other creators coming in, writing stories, creating characters, and eventually they'll have books that aren't even really related to Spawn. So with those books coming out last year in 2021, starting with a one-shot called Spawn Universe, and then Gunslinger Spawn, King Spawn, and finally The Scorched, which was supposed to come out in December, but because of paper and shipping delays, didn't come out till January of this year. But I tried to read those books. I mean, I did read them, but I didn't have all the context that I could have had. There were a lot of references to things that had happened to Spawn and characters that I wasn't that familiar with, and I thought, well, it's because I've never read Spawn, and I certainly want to be in on the ground floor of this Spawn universe because I'm curious to see if McFarlane's going to be able to kick it off. I mean, it's been a long time. Obviously, we have the Marvel and the DC shared universes, the two most well-known, the big two. There haven't been a lot of other shared universes that have really like caught on and hung around for anywhere near the length of time of Marvel and DC. Valiant's done it twice, and you could argue about the success of it either time. It seemed pretty successful until Acclaim bought it and then kind of ran it into the ground. And then the second one seemed pretty successful until the Chinese company DMG took it over and feels like they've run it into the ground and it feels irrelevant now. We had the Ultraverse in Malibu. We had CrossGen, which failed. So it's Dark Horse has tried it several times. Yeah, it seems like it's really hard to make it stick and last for a really long time. So curious to see if McFarlane can catch lightning in a bottle. So anyway, let's dive into this issue number 45. It's a big issue. There's a lot that happens. I really, really enjoyed this issue. It felt a little bit like a return to some of the things I liked best about the series when I first started reading it. A lot of plot threads, a lot of things going on. When you read it, it feels like you're investing time. It takes you a while to get through it, as opposed to maybe the last 3 or 4 issues where they felt like really, really quick reads. That is not the case with the book we're going to talk about today. So great cover by Capullo. We do get the credits inside the cover. Todd McFarlane does the story, Greg Capullo on pencils. Todd McFarlane handles the inks, Tom Orzechowski on letters, Brian Haberlin, not Steve Olive, on the colors. And a special thanks to Danny Mickey, and also a special thanks to our Hangin' with Todd winner, Todd Bluestein, or David Bluestein, rather. Not exactly sure what the Hangin' with Todd contest was. But we do get a summary from last issue. Now, last issue, Spawn was being attacked by this angel. She seemed to get the upper hand. She was about to decapitate him. We never got her name throughout the story. We don't get her name here either, but yet here it is in the summary. So kind of a strange way to find out who she is. But her name is Tiffany. And as it says there, she was vowing to make a name for herself. She feels she's better than Angela. She deserves, the priority 1A position among the angels. And so she knows that if she, or priority A1, did I say 1A? Anyway, it's right there in the summary, priority A1. And she knows that if she destroys Spawn, she's going to get that promotion. We know that Spawn was dissected by Curse and then blown up, and only through the use of his symbiotic costume was he able to survive that. Helped out a little boy who was a huge comic fan and seemed somewhat functional, but then in the next issue, completely dysfunctional. The body completely broken down, not working. And we saw several animals, I guess we'll say. I don't know if insects are animals. I suppose they are. But all these different life forms that were going to Spawn and giving him some of their, quote unquote, evil life force. So you had insects, you had maggots, you had worms, you had rats. And as Spawn was gaining this quote unquote evil life force of these various animals, he was recharging, he was regenerating. Not necessarily his power, the power counter wasn't going up, but he was healing in some way. So kind of interesting, doesn't completely make sense to me. Like if he's recharging, why doesn't his power counter go up? He still had the same amount of power. So maybe it was actually the costume, the symbiotic costume, liveries, sometimes it's called in the book, that was actually recharging or getting this energy and then using it to heal Spawn. So his energy counter was staying the same. Not exactly sure, but as I said, as he was gaining this evil energy, it was glowing green, the way Tony Daniel drew it last issue. And it was bigger and bigger animals, eventually, like I said, rats, and then wolves, and then finally a bear. But the thing was that Tiffany showed up while Spawn was doing this, while he was, quote unquote, recharging. And Tiffany even commented on it, saying, "Oh, I'm lucky enough to have caught you in this weakened state." And Spawn wasn't really fighting back, was kind of letting her just beat on him because he knew at some point she was going to sort of trigger the costume, and the costume would save him, as it's done so many times in the past, but maybe relying on it too much, because it seemed at the end that she was about to decapitate him. And what we learned was that by decapitating Hellspawn, that's the way to rid them of this world. They're going to go all the way back to hell. They'll no longer exist on our plane. So we also did check in on Burke and Williams, and they were talking about wanting to get in touch with Spawn, wanting to find Spawn, get answers from Spawn about where the file came from that had all the information that implicated Burke along with some other people, because when they finally, they got fired, so they didn't get to finish their investigation. So the way they solved that, the only avenue they had was to take the file to the press. And even though it named a lot of other people beyond Chief Banks, I think I said Burke earlier, Banks was the police chief who was implicated in the file and was involved with setting up Billy Kincaid to kill Senator Jennings' daughter. So Banks kills himself at the end of, I guess it would have been issue 43, because after Sam and Twitch were fired, they had no outs. They couldn't go, they couldn't investigate anymore. They needed the upper hand. They gave it to the press, but the press, again, Jason Wynn's reach is big. It's widespread, and he uses influence to basically have everything point at Chief Banks and insulate everybody else. And Banks ends up taking the fall, ends up killing himself. And Sam and Twitch want answers. Okay, first of all, Spawn, where did you get this file? And what exactly does it mean? Because, again, so many people were implicated in the file and in the information we gave to the press. Not all of it made the papers because of the influence of Wynn. Those other people need justice. Those other people need to be brought to justice. So that's where Sam and Twitch are. But remember, they don't have the resources of being police officers anymore. So how's that going to play out? So as we get into this issue, we see Spawn is kind of laying there on it's an interesting splash page. He's kind of laying there on this twisted tree, and we're reminded that if you remove the head of a Spawn, that will kill it. It voids the creature and its living shell from this level of existence, is the way that that it's worded. So its severed head is proof of that finality. And so just like we saw last issue, there is Tiffany about to cut off the head of Spawn. So he's got his mask on, and she jumps up, she swings her sword, we see it in silhouette, and then his head falls onto the ground. Now, if you notice, when his head hits the ground there and kind of bounces and rolls, it doesn't have the mask on. And so she picks up the head and thinks that she's done what she set out to do, and then all of a sudden the head turns into this writhing mass of like maggots and worms and all kinds of disgusting things, and she kind of freaks out. She's like, "It's not real, it's magic, he fooled me." And Spawn, apparently recovering from the beating he had been taking, says just that. "Yeah, you fell for the bait. pulled his head back at the last second, or whatever wording. It's, I mean, I get it. Like maybe it was a glamour, but I think it could have been like the transition wasn't great in the panels, because it really did look like it was his head there with the mask on. And then obviously when it falls down, the head rolls off, doesn't have a mask. So it's clearly not the same one, but I don't know. It was kind of wonky, and Spawn says, "Oh, you took the bait." And then we're told the creature's cloak had briefly obscured its head long enough for a mound of hidden worms to slither across the folds and throughout, and roll onto the ground. I don't know. It just seemed a little wonky. I mean, there's a lot of things to like about it. The fact that you tricked her and she's holding a mass of worms in her hand is kind of cool. But anyway, they start fighting once again, with Spawn saying, I'm not ready to die. And he's sort of waiting for, again, the uniform to kind of take over. He doesn't seem to want to use his power. He's always so reluctant to use it because he has such a finite amount. And he mentions Angela, and Tiffany says, Angela's a traitor, and I won't let you, mock our cause. And so eventually, and I don't know, it's not clear why, but eventually, as usually happens, the costume does seem to take over. Spawn goes underground. There's some commentary here by McFarlane about how the greatest evil lives below, lives underground, eternal blackness. And that is basically what they do. They go underground and then attack Angela from below. So it's a pretty interesting way for Spawn to get the upper hand. He's got a little bit of an advantage, but again, Tiffany's very much a zealot, and she's not going to go down without a fight. So we leave them battling for now, and we check in on the three talking heads that we so often see. The reporter from CNN talking about Chief Banks and his funeral, and how there was only one police escort, one lone police officer on a motorcycle, followed by the hearse with just one, just the pastor in it, and then Chief Banks. So kind of a sad way and to celebrate somebody's life. And obviously, with all the news that came out, New York's Finest is not about to honor this guy. So kind of interesting. But we get a different perspective from the E! Hollywood guy, and he talks about how restrained it was and how classy and a lot of taste, and it seems to be kind of missing the plot. Meanwhile, the right-wing guy is on KCIN4, and he talks about the fact that Chief Banks was probably corrupt all along, how he worked for just about every different security or policing force known to man, and all he was doing the whole time was running these criminal plots in the background. And it's no wonder that he didn't have time to get married or raise any kids, because he was too busy raising his own private army that would go out to do his bidding. So it might be a little far-fetched there, but he's never one to shy away from his opinion. Next up, we check on Sam and Twitch. They're having a conversation. Twitch still hasn't told his wife that he got fired. Sam's trying to convince him, saying, we can't, she'll understand. I mean, he's actually giving good advice for once. It's like, your money's going to run out. She's going to find out you were fired eventually. And then she's going to wonder, well, where were you all those weeks when you were pretending to go to work? So, but Twitch is struggling. Maybe it's my backwards thinking that a man should provide for his family. And I just don't know what to do. And I was thinking that maybe if we talk to Spawn and we solve this case, that the board would reinstate us. And Sam's like, I'm not going back to work for the police. No, that's not going to happen. And I have bigger ideas for us. And he goes to his fridge, because you kind of think, okay, and I mentioned this before, maybe they'll open their own detective agency or something like that. But then he goes to the fridge. I'm like, what the heck? He pulls out an old can of Crisco, and inside the can is a bunch of cash. And he tells Twitch exactly what I sort of suspected. hey, I want to be our own boss. I want to run our own agency doing private detective work. And I thought it would be great if I had a partner, and that partner could be you. And Twitch kind of loses it. He's like, oh, I love you, man. I mean, sir. And Sam kind of rolls his eyes. And so, yeah, they're going to kind of hang out their own shingle, do what they do best, but not have to worry about answering to any higher ups, any kind of people that are corrupt or anything like that. So makes a lot of sense. And that's where Sam and Twitch are. Meanwhile, back during this fight, Spawn is once again losing, and we're told about the legend of the Black Dispersal. So this legend, this hellspawn, I don't know if I can call it a power ability, I guess. The silent signal goes out to all the occupants of the Shadowlands. And again, it's all those animals that we saw that are willing to give up part of their evil life force to the hellspawn. And basically the signal, the Black Dispersal, it signals all those sorts of animals that, hey, there's a being of light that's here trespassing again. And, we need your help to remove it. So while Spawn continues to battle Tiffany, all these animals are being attracted to her, and she doesn't realize it. So the other part of this is just like when Spawn was needing nourishment, or at least his symbiotic costume was needing nourishment, and it was taking that evil life force. This is sort of the same thing. And at that moment when it's triggered, and you can see it here, it's a really cool looking image from Capullo. At that moment when he's gathered enough of this kind of evil life force energy, from his chest comes this plasma strand, as it's called. Condensing its internal neurosystem flow, the hellspawn forces each plasma strand to gather its dark evil to a single point, a concentrate of pure malicious energy. So he fires this energy out of his chest. And it says it's usually released through the chest in a convulsive explosion that showers its intended target with the unspeakable aura of the damned. So basically, it's like painting a target with a laser, right? And once this thing fires out of Spawn and hits Tiffany, she's kind of gloating like, oh, is that the best you got? Like, that didn't even do anything. That didn't even bother me. Like, you're weak and I'm about to kill you. Because she doesn't realize that what Spawn's done is basically just set her up for all these animals to attack. And that's exactly what happens. So Spawn was sort of waiting for the costume to save him. But in the end, he does have to use some of his own power, because you do see, let me go back a page here, you do see that when he does unleash that pure malicious energy, that concentrate, that his power does go down. He was previously at 6081. He drops all the way down to 6786. So it is not an insignificant amount of power that he uses to sort of paint this target on Tiffany's back. And then as all these animals are attacking her, she's trying to get to defend herself, the costume trips her with the chains, and she falls down, and the animals just jump on her. And it ends up being a pretty brutal scene, as you can see. And even Spawn says, well, that's insane, because she's been picked clean. I mean, it's just her skeleton left. It's pretty gross. So now we're told that his cloak whips into the cool air, proclaiming victory with its dance. So at the end of the day, Spawn did have to use some of his powers, but between the animals, between his costume, he is able to defeat Tiffany. Meanwhile, Wanda's gone to the doctor. We saw, I think it was last issue or the issue before, she's been having a cough. Doctor says, yeah, it looks like you have a little bit of a strep throat, a little bit of a viral infection. I'll give you some medicine for it. And then also asks after Terry, saying, your husband seems to be skipping his checkups too. You probably should have him come in. And Wanda does mention, yeah, I think I passed my cough along to him. So he's pretty busy, but I'll try to see if I can get him to come in. So on the next page, we do see Terry. He's working late. He's coughing. He's taking cough drops. He doesn't want to quit working. He doesn't want to listen to his body, because we're even told Terry Fitzgerald will soon wish he'd listened to his body, because he thinks to himself, I feel like crap. But he's on a lead. He thinks he might actually have a way to find some incriminating evidence against Jason Wynn. So, he doesn't want to stop burning the midnight oil. But does that mean he's going to get really sick? Does it mean, like, why would he need to listen to his body? Get really sick, or he's sick and then something happens to Wanda and he's not there to help with her. Like, we don't know yet. But forget about foreshadowing. Like, McFarlane's telling us straight out something bad's about to happen, right? So we'll see how that plays out. Probably Violator related. And then on the next page, we see that Spawn has returned back to the alley. So you can see, like I was saying before at the top of the episode, about how much this is more like the first issues that we got, where it jumps around from storyline to storyline, and we sort of check in on everybody, and it feels like we get a big chunk of story. A lot of stuff's happening. We've already had a fight. We've already checked in on Sam and Twitch. We've checked in on Wanda. We've checked in on Terry. Spawn has returned from the wilderness once again. I mean, that part does feel a little repetitive. The fact that he keeps getting kidnapped or thrown, into the South or West Virginia or wherever. I've talked about that before, about how I just prefer him to just stay in New York. But one thing that is interesting, so I sort of thought, with all this healing and his body being put back together after being dissected by Curse and borrowing evil life energy from all these different animals, that he would heal his face too. But apparently not, because we do see in this, on the top of this page, illustrated by Capullo, that he still has the shoelace stitching on his face. So he makes it back to his alley, and he's thinking, not good memories of it. When he sees this throne, it reminds him that Curse had booby-trapped it, and a reminder of being abducted. And he's thinking about how the craziness of his life needs to stop, right? He just needs a chance to catch his breath. Now, while he's kind of reminiscing on what happened, Cagliostro shows up and says, you can't run from it. And Spawn's surprised to see him, and Cog's saying, it's a part of you. It's not going to go away, but it is good to have you back. And Spawn's like, well, what do you mean? Are you talking about the costume? Because I feel like my costume's been taking me over, like it's got control of me. And Cagliostro's like, well, then take control back. Don't let your symbiotic costume, rule you. And Spawn's like, well, what do you think I've been doing? And Cagliostro's like, I feel like you've been losing the grip on your uniform, on your life. You got to remember, it's a two-way street. It's a symbiotic relationship. Like, it needs you as much as you need it. And it keeps changing and evolving, like, faster than we've seen these sorts of costumes change before. So you need to fight it. You need to be the warrior that you are, and regain control. And Spawn's like, but I don't even know why this is happening. And Cagliostro's like, well, did something happen? Was there something traumatic? And Spawn mentions having had the costume separated from him. And Cagliostro's like, okay, is that it? Anything else? And Spawn says, well, we just killed an angel, and I felt like the angel deserved it, and we didn't have a choice. So, the costume, was a part of that. And Cagliostro's, he doesn't mind that necessarily. He's like, well, yeah, the history of angels and hell spawns is, it's not like they really get along. So, maybe that's not such a bad thing, but there still is that trauma that's been experienced by both Al Simmons and the costume. So Spawn does mention, that the costume did help me. My body, everything's reattached that was removed from the dissection. And now that I'm, more back to my old self, maybe the costume will let me be in control again. And Carlos was like, I don't think so. Your outside costume the symbiote has evolved too far. It's not going to just give control back. What you need to do is train it to listen to you. You got to become its its master. It's not enough to just be the host and to nourish the costume. You got to show it who's boss. And Spawn's like, well, what if I don't? What if I don't care? And Cagliostro's like, well, then God help us all, because the costume craves evil, right? That's what it fed on. That's how it got the evil energy life force that it needed to somewhat heal Spawn's body. Not all the way, right? Because we do see that he still has the shoelace stitches in his face. But the costume, it's a symbiote. It's an alien symbiote from hell that was born in hell, born in a place of evil. Unlike Al Simmons, made his mistakes in life, died, went to hell, and then, made his bad deal with Malbolgia, but there's still good in him. We know that a lot of times he tries to do the right thing. He wasn't born in hell, as opposed to this costume that was born in hell and ultimately is craves evil in a lot of ways. And so once Cagliostro leaves, Spawn tries to get some sleep. And when he's asleep, the costume once again assumes control, which is really creepy. Spawn's not even aware of it. So we see that while Al Simmons is sleeping, the costume goes and dumps a big, huge glob of those worms, maggots, insect type things, the same sort of mass that it used to trick Tiffany into thinking she had decapitated Spawn, and dumps it in this dumpster, this garbage dumpster. And it says that the costume was looking for the ideal spot, being very careful not to wake its host, finding a perfect spot for this mass, a place where it can grow and it can multiply and it can thrive. And then the costume settles back down, content that it's found a home for the worms that it carries, for his worms, his carriers, his evil. So my first thought is, well, that's pretty creepy. My second thought is, does the costume sense that Al Simmons is not evil enough for the symbiote? That at some point Al Simmons would turn against the costume, or that Al Simmons won't do enough evil things to nourish the costume. So with these worms and carriers and whatnot that the costume brought back from the woods, is the costume hoping that it can grow its own body and then bond with that and leave Al Simmons' body of necroplasm to its own devices? Yeah, it's not enough that Spawn's got to deal with Sam and Twitch looking for him, Jason Wynn trying to mess with him, Malbolgia limiting the amount of power he has, Violator wanting him dead, the drama and chaos with Wanda and Terry Fitzgerald. No, that's not enough. McFarlane's got to throw another antagonist in here in the story, and that antagonist is Spawn's costume itself, the alien symbiote that, it's supposed to be a symbiotic relationship. They're supposed to work together. They depend on each other. They need each other. Even Cagliostro said so. Well, it seems like the costume doesn't want to need Spawn. It wants to be able to operate independently of Spawn. And if it can grow its own sort of insect-like body, then what do I need Spawn for? What do I need Al Simmons, necroplasm or psychoplasm, whatever you want to call it? So it's really cool. Again, I love this type of story. I love the fact that, or I love this type of comic, I should say, that it's got all the subplots back in it. Not to say that we didn't have some good issues most recently, but this feels like getting back to structure and form that I prefer, especially because McFarlane does seem to be quite worried. I mean, you'll see if you're watching on YouTube, there's a lot of dialogue boxes that I redacted and whited out. But that's how we got so much story in this issue, because McFarlane gives us a lot of language. Now, the floweriness of the language, the exposition, he's gotten better. There's no walls of text in this issue. I don't feel like we got a repeat of a bunch of things that we've been told before. So I take that as progression. I take that as progress from McFarlane as a writer. But some people might feel that this one's a little dialogue heavy, but I don't mind it because, again, that's what allows us to check in on everybody and have so much context and have an issue that feels really impactful, like a lot happened. And I don't know, I just love the idea of introducing another problem, another issue, another antagonist for Spawn to have to worry about, one that's so close to him that he might not even see it, right? His costume is so close, he might not know it's an enemy until it's too late, which is bringing a whole nother level of tension to the book. As far as the art, man, as much as I'm a Tony Daniel fan, I don't think art really gets much better in Spawn. Now, again, I'm only on issue 45, so we got, another, 275 issues to go or so. But for me, for now, at this point in the reading order, I can't really say I've seen better art than Greg Capullo pencils with McFarlane inks. I mean, there's a lot of action in this one with Tiffany. There's some great character work with Sam and Twitch. The scene, even the talking head scenes with Cagliostro, like all of it works really, really well. And there's some brutal images too, like the first splash page image we talked about with Spawn kind of draped along the tree trunk, Tiffany being picked clean by all these animals, Cagliostro and Spawn having their conversation. It's somewhat of a talking head situation, but it's never boring. Capullo does a fantastic job of keeping it interesting, giving us tons of detail. I know I talked extensively last episode and last issue about how it looked like digital color and it lacked detail in the background. And although it looked kind of cool, it was more about the actual color palettes and the feelings that the color evoked more than the actual art. I mean, this is going back the other way to huge detail in pencils and great facial expressions and all of it rendered in a traditional way as opposed to through the computer coloring. So the art is really fantastic in this one. So that's going to do it for this episode. Really excited. And again, not that I thought the previous few issues were bad by any means. And maybe I didn't even realize how fast paced they had gotten and how much they felt like we were getting just a shorter piece of story till we hit this one. And to me, this is a huge high note. Like it just soars above the other issues in terms of like the amount of story and setup and, bringing that costume as an enemy within, if you will. I think it's just a fantastic move by McFarlane. So we'll see how that plays out. Really excited to dive into the next few issues. So be sure you join us for those. We really appreciate it. If you're checking this out on the Comic Boom YouTube channel, we appreciate you guys doing that. Be sure you subscribe to the channel. If you listen to it and you haven't seen the incredible artwork and you want to see the video, go to YouTube, Comic Space Boom ! That's Rocky's channel. He should be back on these episodes soon. But make sure you subscribe to the Comic Boom channel. Ring the notification bell so you know when Rocky puts out new content. Like this video. All of that stuff really helps us. If you have discovered us on YouTube, looking for Spawn recaps and whatnot, and you want to check out our other content that's audio only on the Comic Source, just go to your favorite podcasting platform or podcasting app on your smart device. Do a search for the Comic Source and subscribe. That way you can listen to all the creator interviews we do and show recaps and other coverage like New Comics Wednesdays and all that sort of stuff. So we appreciate your support. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.